Good evening and welcome back, everybody. It was a pretty productive day. A lot more work than I thought it was going to be. So today was pretty much all about the left aileron. I started out getting the ribs ready for both of them, thinking I was going to go back and forth, but quickly realized I'm at the point where I need to focus on just one of them and see it through. So today was the left one. I'm not sure when I'll get around to the right one. Got a whole bunch of stuff coming up in the next few days, but anyhow, see, I got those ribs in there. Everything's kind of clecoed in. You get the nose ribs in, and that big pipe you see is a 1/2 inch thick, heavy wall, galvanized water pipe that is used for a counterbalance weight in the aileron. So right now, just clecoing everything together and mocking it up so I can start final drilling. I have seriously condensed a lot of this so you don't have to see me do all of the same prep stuff you've seen me do a million times. There are some interesting takeaways from building this that I want to make sure I cover. There's a lot of bowing and flex in that nose skin. I was actually a little worried that it was going to have bulges in it, but it ended up working out. Part of the trick was also using the edge forming tool to put a slight bend on both the edges of it so it sits nice and tight once you rivet it in place, since it just sits flush on top of the aft skins. So here you see me drilling through the pre-punched holes in the nose skin into that galvanized pipe. These are number 30 holes that will eventually hold countersunk CS 4-4 rivets. I do have I think it's the 120 degree dimple die for that size, just for doing those rivets because they have a different angle than the normal rivets. But that becomes a challenge later too. Now, if you notice the multiple clecos on that bottom spar, they start out as number 40 holes, but they have you upsize them to 30 because those are also going to get CS 4-4 countersunk rivets. Those are the last ones you end up doing, and that closes everything out, so there's no way to buck rivets in there, so you have to put pulled rivets in. Anyhow, there it is, all drilled, mocked up. Now you use the long number 30 bit to go through the back side of the nose rib so you can drill the hole in the counterweight pipe through that tab in the front of the nose rib. And now you have to machine countersink all of those holes. So just a number 30, machine countersink it. And continue with the prep work. So just a little tiny bit of that. Same as before, once everything's drilled, you got to go deburr everything, clean up the edges, yada yada yada, all that good stuff. Now you see me with the tape measure. I was measuring something out. I'm drilling a 3/16 hole in the back side of my back riveting bucking bar so that I can insert a dimple die into it. And I'll show you what the reasoning is behind that here in a second. I've got a piece of wood with some dowels on it to keep the pipe from rolling, mounted in my vise. I'm using that to hold up the leading edge skin, and I'm clecoing it in place. And basically I'm going to use those machine countersinks that I did in the pipe, and then that dimple die, the positive side on the other side, and a hammer, and making all of my dimples. I saw this on somebody else's build log. I thought it was a pretty clever idea because there's no real good way to get a female die in there because of how sharp that radius is. So just use the pipe that's going to be in there anyways, and it worked out really, really well. Please ignore the box of overflowing trash in the back. I need to make a run to get rid of all the boxes and the blue vinyl that's starting to pile up. Definitely recommend this method. Worked out really nice. I got some pretty clean dimples out of it, and don't really see it, but I have one of the pop rivets right there on the bench. I was checking, making sure it was good. So now I am using those special dimple dies I got to dimple the bottom holes for those countersunk pulled rivets, and then I'll switch it out to the number 40 and do the rest of them. At some point during all of this prep work, somehow I completely forgot to dimple the rest of the trailing edge skins, both the sides and the part where it meets the spar. I figure it out pretty quick when I try and cleco it all back together again later. I was attempting to show you a close-up of the rivet, the pull rivet sitting nice in the countersink, but I had my finger right in the way, so you couldn't see anything anyways. So here's some more of that parts prep, just deburring, cleaning stuff out, and ultimately scuffing and priming all of the ribs and interior parts. And here we've jumped ahead. Everything is magically primed, and it's time to start assembling. First thing you do, the plans are fairly detailed in what order they want you to do things, but I will tell you right now, I guarantee you they're not 100% right, but some of it is. So you start off riveting those nose ribs to the counterweight, and very quickly I realized I riveted them on upside down. This is all those holes that I drilled in the for the leading edge should be pointed slightly down, and I put the ribs on backwards so they were all pointed up. Oops. Not the first time I've had to drill out rivets. So quickly swap the sides so that they all point the right direction, and we'll try this again. Much better that time. Now the clecos are going in. That pipe is surprisingly heavy too. You want to make sure you got a fair amount of clecos in there to help support it. So getting close to doing another trick I saw somebody else do, and I'll show you that here in a second, or I'll point it out when I do it. But first, the first thing it has you do now is rivet the nose ribs to the main spar. So there's three, I think they're 4-5 rivets that go through the back edge of the rib and into the spar. And I'm making life difficult for myself because I haven't yet figured out that I should really take that trailing edge skin off. It doesn't need to be clecoed on right now and in my way. We'll skip forward to where I figure that out. Oh, look at all that room I got now. Much easier to squeeze the rivets that way. So anyhow, it's 3 per side. Get those installed, do the other side, and then that part's done. And if you look closely, you can see the top of that nose skin just bulging out in the middle. I was really worried that it was gonna give me issues, but it all worked out. It's kind of the way this thing contorts. So here's the part I saw on another build log, and I really wish I could remember the builder's name. I'll have to go look it up and tell you. But you make these little wood stands to hold the nose of the aileron off of the workbench, and nothing gets attached to that outer edge till you put the brackets on, so it's a perfect place to stick those things. And of course I put really long screws in first, and I realized I might not be able to get those out, so I put shorter screws in. So now you put the trailing edge on, and the whole point to this is you have to shoot and buck all of the rivets that connect the nose skin, trailing edge skin, and spar all along down the length of the spar on the top. There you see me realizing I forgot to dimple all those holes. So by having it held up like that, it's holding it up in a position that I can at least reach around it and through it to try and shoot these rivets. But of course I still try it the hard way first. I'm reaching my arm through there, so I took off the watch because it was getting in the way, and I'm trying to shoot and buck these rivets. And mind you, there's rib stiffeners or skin stiffeners all throughout this thing, so they're just scraping up my arm every time I try and reach it in there like that. I did probably about a third of the rivets, sliding my hand up the length of it that way, before I got smart. There I am counting to try and figure out if my arm will even reach halfway through. And of course, I'm totally ignoring the fact that the skin's not attached on the backside. I can just reach up and through it. And here I figure it out. The caveman discovers fire. So now I'm just reaching underneath and up and around. I'm using my little tungsten bucking bar. It has an angled edge on it, which you need to use for these because there's no other good way to get on those rivets. If and when you ever get around to doing it, you'll see what I mean. But the spar's not deep enough for you to set the whole bucking bar in there, and you can't turn it sideways because you'll end up hitting those stiffeners or other clecos. But once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty quick, and it actually came out pretty nice. I had one screwed up rivet in the beginning I had to drill out, but the rest of them are all acceptable. And I'll show you a quick picture of what those look like on the inside. So that vertical row you see is the rivets I was shooting. That's the back side of them. Anyhow, time to clean up the bench so I can finish this thing. I got to a point where I was determined I was going to get this at least one done tonight. So the trailing edge skin goes underneath the leading edge skin. And then the next order of operation is it tells you to install the rivets in the top side of the nose ribs. Top side only. So that's all of those ones on the curve. Okay, easy enough. Then it tells you to go ahead and install the ribs. And they only go in one way, and I put them in backwards at first, and it's pretty apparent that they don't sit right. There's a tooling hole in there. It should be closer to the bottom of the skin, not the top. So now you get these installed, and it tells you to install the rivets in the top edge only, and the ones that go through the spar. Again, fairly easy, just set them and squeeze them. And the trailing edge most one I was able to get with the squeezer, just barely. You'll see me busting out the drill bits. It's inevitable. I have to clean some things out because they don't fit quite as well as they did before the primer. So now, the next thing the plans tell you to do, and I do not agree with this step at all, but I do start it, is it tells you to go ahead and install the brackets at this point. Fully install them, put them on, torque them. So I start getting out the brackets and the hardware. And I got to clean more stuff out. And right here, I'm looking at that bottom bolt, and I realize if I put that bolt in, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to squeeze that rivet on the bottom skin later when I have to do it. And it's the same way on the other side. So I quickly halt the install of the brackets. I decided on the other side I'd put the top one in, and I'd get the one that goes into the nut plate started, figuring there's a reason the plans want me to put them in right now. Spoiler alert, there is no reason. They just get in your way. They were in the way for those rivets, and you're about to see they're going to be in the way for something else too. Oh yeah, once you flip it over, it tells you to weigh down the bottom skin. So I got a piece of foam and the socket sets and one of the dies, and yeah, seemed good enough, or yokes. So now the order of operation, once you flip it over, is you install the CS4-4 pull rivets in the counterweight and the nose. Those all went in really nice and sat well, and I was thrilled that the Milwaukee pull riveter was actually behaving today. So now you got to do those bottom nose rivets, and here's another spot where those brackets are in the way, because the aftmost one is behind that bracket. So you gotta, if the bracket's there, you gotta go in at a weird angle to try and get it. Again, there's no logical reason for that bracket to be there yet. It's not helping with anything, and it definitely doesn't make it easier to install by doing it earlier, because the things that are gonna give you issues already exist. It's the bracket itself. So next thing that gets done, and pretty much the last thing, is all of the pull rivets along the spar. Pretty straightforward and easy. Tells you to make sure that the aileron remains flat and straight, and I checked mine after I pulled it out. It is as true as it can be as far as I can tell. Okay, so now that all that's done, back to the brackets. I'm quickly discovering the next problem. Those brackets are drilled in such a way that the 3/8 bolts, the 3-4s that are going through there, don't have enough clearance for you to get a socket on them at all. There you go. They are too close to the edges of those flanges, so you can't put a socket on there. That one definitely not. No way, no chance. And the back side, you have limited room because it's inside that little pocket area of the rib, which if you'd have tried to do it when the plans told you to do it, that was already there anyway, so it still would have been the same thing. So the only thing you can do is take a pair of wrenches, hold one sideways straight on those ones on that tiny bracket, and take another one and move the nut about a quarter turn at a time. The one that goes in the nut plate is even worse. I had to use the 12-point box end of the wrench because it was just skinny enough to get on there, and I could move it maybe an eighth of a turn one way, and then I had to flip the wrench over and do it the other way. It was a pain. Ran it all down, got them all seated, got the torque wrench out, and then the only way to do it was using a crow's foot. So I had to do all of the math for that, along with the drag, torque, and everything else. But in the end, they are all in, they are all run down, and they are all torqued. I feel Vans would have benefited from using some, I don't know, some socket head bolts in this location, so you could at least use a ratchet on one part of it, but I'm no engineer. So it's all done. I'll leave you with some parting shots. That's the left aileron. I'll get to the right one here as soon as I can to finish it up. But it feels good to have another big component finished. And couldn't help myself. There it is on the wing. See y'all on the next one.